Hello, everybody. It's Professor Jim. Welcome back to AP Music Theory, lesson number 3. We're going to finish up with some specialty clefs in different scenarios and then move into different types of notation to close out this chapter. Your next class will have a test. At the end of these little sections, we'll have tests. It'll just be a cumulative version of the quizzes and worksheets that you've already completed. So if you've been doing the work, everything is there for you. They'll just be a little bit longer, a little bit more in depth. Also, a nice resource and study material we've created for you are the note cards, the flashcards that you'll see on the next lesson to help you prepare for the test. They're vocabulary that you'll need to know going in. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some specialty clefs here. Let's take a look at Sibelius, our music notation software. Now, this is a music notation software created by Avid, who also creates Pro Tools, among other things. And so this is their music notation. You can really create some professional-looking scores out of this. It's a valuable, valuable tool to get to learn to use. All right, so if we take a look at this, we've written this tenor line here. And sometimes with tenor voices, using a bass clef solely gets a little bit difficult with all of these ledger lines. We see up to 3 ledger lines here in this particular version, this particular melody I've created. And so sometimes you'll see this tenor line move from bass clef to something that looks like this. Let's see. So if we take this line right here and we paste it up here, now, right here. So if you see this little 8 at the bottom of this treble clef, this denotes that all of the written pitches are played or sung down an octave from written. And it really just eliminates a lot of the ledger lines that sometimes can appear in the bass clef for tenor voices. And so we write it on a treble clef. We add this little 8 at the bottom, and that tells us that everything that you see should be played down an octave. There's some other specialty clefs as well that we can look at. There's one that also will ask you to play an octave higher. And sometimes we see those that's what that looks like right there. You can see the 8 is above the treble clef, and some higher pitched instruments, maybe piccolo, some flute parts, get really crazy with the ledger lines, and those professional players learn those ledger lines like we learned the staff. But sometimes it just gets ridiculous, especially if we have lots of runs and fast notes. We sometimes we'll write things down an octave, but they're played or what is played or performed is an octave from what's written. If we scroll down Sibelius here, we see just some other specialty clefs. Our percussion clef, oftentimes percussion is on one line. You can have 2-line, 3-line, 4-line, or 5-line percussion staffs, depending on what instrument you're writing for. And a lot of times the one line will just be for one particular instrument, a snare drum or a cowbell or what have you. These are unpitched, non-pitched percussion instruments, drums, if you will. And then we see another version, a 5-line version, that's sometimes used for a drum set. And because the drum set has a hi-hat and toms and snare drums and crash cymbals, oftentimes we need more lines to help communicate the different drums that the composer intends to be used during whatever piece of music it is. And then kind of the last more common one is a tab line. And this is usually for our acoustic guitars or our guitars that are reading tab. There's some guitar players that are very good. They can read just a regular staff like we see up top here. And sometimes it'll also be written in tab version. And this just helps those guitar players be able to sight read that a little bit faster if they're well versed in tab. Now, there's a number of other clefs that you'll see out there. Sometimes there's no clef. Sometimes there's crazy bass clefs that are not on the 4th line. They might be down. They might be up. So these movable clefs, like the C clef, it's a movable clef or whatever line that the sort of the center of that stylized 3 comes together. That's middle C. Whichever line the 2 dots in a bass clef staff are, or the F clef, those 2 dots, whatever line that goes between them is F, below middle C, F3. So these are all kind of movable and flexible clefs that you might see. Now, I will say on the test, you're really going to have to understand bass clef. You're going to have to understand treble clef, and tenor and alto is very possibly going to be on your AP exam as well. Okay, let's look at a couple of images here. We're going to start with looking at accidentals. And you may have seen these before. Most of you that have been playing music for a while understand these. The natural sign, sharp, flat. Double sharp may not be something you've seen a lot of, or double flat, but they do exist out there, and they do have an importance when it comes to music theory. You might say, well, why would I write an A double flat? Why not just make that a G? Yes, I could play the note G on the piano, and it will sound the exact same thing as an A double flat. But when it comes to music theory and creating certain types of harmonic structures and chords, intervals and things that are required, or very complicated scales, it does require double flats, double sharps at times to make them agreeable from a music theory standpoint. More on that down the road. But those are the accidentals we're going to see. We don't see a natural very much unless we're canceling an existing sharp or flat, whether that sharp or flat is in the key signature or maybe appeared as an accidental in the measure that the music is in. Remember, once we see a sharp, a flat, or a natural double sharp or double flat for that matter, that accidental carries through the rest of the measure. And then at the beginning of the next measure, it'll reset to the key signature as designated. Now, when we take a look at what sort of these chromatics look like on the piano, we have C's and C sharps and D's and D flats. Now, here's your first vocabulary word of the day, and we're going to talk about enharmonic. An enharmonic note is a note that sounds the same, it has the same pitch, but has a different note. So a C sharp and D flat, for example, would be enharmonic. A D sharp and E flat are enharmonic pitches. You might have a quiz or test question that will say, what note is enharmonic with B flat? And the answer would be A sharp. And as we look at the piano keyboard, which is a really great visual for understanding these different accidentals and half-step relationships, is understanding that between E and F, there is no black key. And between B and C, there is no black key. Which means we're going to now talk about what a half step is and what a whole step is and an interval. So your next vocabulary word to look at is an interval. And an interval is a musical measurement. It is the same as measuring a piece of wood in feet or inches, or measuring a cup of flour or a tablespoon of sugar. It is a unit of measure that we use in music. An interval is just the distance between two notes. And very basically, we start by learning about half steps and whole steps. And a half step is just one note to the very next note. So when we look at the note C, and then we go to the note C sharp, that is a half step. We're going to go back over here to Sibelius, and I'm going to share a really cool, if you have Sibelius, this is a really neat feature that's built in here. I'm going to delete some of this here. Delete some of these notes. And I'm going to show, if you go up here to View in Sibelius and Panels, and you click Keyboard, any note that you click, it'll highlight in purple on the keyboard down here. So let's go over here. Let's construct a melody here in Sibelius. Just a very simple one here in the tenor line. Let's see. There we go. Very simple melodies here that played back. All right, nothing too complicated. But look, as the notes go along, or if you click notes, it'll show you on the keyboard where those notes exist. And also the keyboard's really good about showing us these different half steps and whole step relationships. And so if I'm at a C, the C sharp is just the note next to it, which would be this next black key right here, the C sharp. Let's go ahead and make that a C sharp. Boom, there you go. It's C, that note right there lights up purple, a C sharp. Let's take that away. Goes back to C. Same thing here, D. Let's make this a D flat. Make it a D flat. Boom, there it goes. It goes right here to this note again. The enharmonic of C sharp is D flat. And I don't know, let's see, let's go over here to this A. Let's make that an A flat. And it goes down a half step to A flat. As you might imagine, 2 half steps equals a whole step. And so when we talk about intervals, it's important to understand that when we add these accidental sharps or flats, a sharp adds a half step to the existing note, and a flat adds 1 half step down to the existing note. Double sharp, 2 half steps or a whole step up, and then a double flat, 2 half steps or a whole step down. And so that's the function of double sharps, double flats, sharps and flats, how they relate to the existing note, half steps and whole steps. All right, let's go back over here to our images. The next thing we're going to look at is the parts of the note. Very basically, we start off with this quarter note here. We have a note head and a stem. After that, we're going to take a look at an eighth note. Just adds one more element to it. We still have the note head. We still have the stem. Now the little doohickey that kind of curves off the stem is called a flag. Now, not only can we have notes that go up, right? We've seen this before. We also have notes that can go down. So we have the same eighth note, the same note head, the same flag, and the same stem. But instead of being on the right side of the note, like it is when it's going up, the stem comes off the left side of the note. So if we go back to the first eighth note, we're going to see the stem goes off the right side of the note head. And then when we come back to the stem down, we see that comes off the left side of the note head. All right, vocabulary time. If we go back to our vocabulary, if you're taking notes, this is definitely something to take a look at. We're going to talk about bar lines. A bar line is the vertical line that divides the staff into measures. So we have a line that divides all the measures is called a bar line. A measure is that space between the bar lines. So the measure is the space between 2 bar lines. A double bar line is when you have 2 lines right next to each other. And usually that means that's ending a section of music, not the end of the piece of music, but a section of the music. Maybe it's divided somehow from section to section. And then finally, we have a final bar line, which is that skinny line followed by a fat line. It tells you that the end of the piece or composition is here. All right, let's take a look at what that looks like. So we have this little excerpt of music here. We've got a couple things we're going to point out. Now, you're all going to have to label this on your own. So pay close attention to what we're doing here as we go down the list. All right, let's take a look at these brackets and arrows. Let's start filling them in. So we start with the stems going down. Most of the time, when you are above line number 3, the stems will go down. Now, I say most of the time because stay tuned. There's going to be an exception to up and down here. But the next set, we see that the stems are all up. That's because they are on line number 3 or below. So when the notes are below line number 3 or on number 3, usually the stems go up. There are exceptions, and we're going to see one in just a few minutes, where when you're on line number 3, sometimes the stems can go up or down. Most of the time they're going to go up, but there are exceptions to the rule. Next, you see we saw eighth notes that had a flag on them, but the eighth notes you're seeing here are beamed. These are connecting 2 or more eighth notes will have a beam going across the top of them. And next we see a single eighth note with that familiar flag we saw earlier in the lesson. But notice here the stem is going down. We're on line number 3. Hey, wait a minute, Professor Jim, you said when it's on line number 3, the stem goes up. That's true most of the time. In the case of a single eighth note, sometimes the stem will go down, or depending on what happens after that eighth note, which direction the melody or the line is going, sometimes those stems are down, sometimes they're up. It's really up to you what you want to do. Conventionally, we're going to see the stems going down when the notes are ascending or going up, and we're going to see the stems going up when the eighth notes are descending, as in the prior example. There's an example of a double bar line right there, dividing sections of music. This is something called a cautionary accidental. Now, if you look at this measure, you see the F sharp on the downbeat of the measure. But remember that once we have an accidental, that accidental carries through the entire measure unless otherwise stated. So, do we have to put that F sharp there? No, it's understood that because it appears on the downbeat that the last eighth note should also be an F sharp. But sometimes it's a courtesy the composer might add a cautionary accidental just to say, oh, by the way, I know a lot's going on since beat 1. You might need a reminder. Oh, and by the way, the very next note is the natural version of that, so not to confuse the two. So that is another F sharp, as it's almost a courtesy to help the player play the right note. Next, you're going to see the bar line, just a simple line dividing the measure. And then there's a bracket of what a measure is. And then finally, we have our final bar line, that double bar line. The skinny line followed by the fat line gets us to the end of the piece. Now, look, accidentals are added to a pitch. They are always notated on the left of the note head. One of the things a lot of kids get wrong on the test is when you're notating sharps or flats, that we sometimes don't put them to the left of the note. It's a really easy way to get points marked off when you didn't need to. So make sure whenever you're doing a natural, a flat, a double sharp, a double flat, it's just to the left of the note, no matter if the note stem is going up or down. Right? So know where you flip your stems, know which stems go up, know which ones go down, and know where those accidentals go on the left side, always on the left side of the note. All right, everybody, you got the test in your next lesson. Study up, study those quizzes and worksheets that you've done to this point. Look at the study materials, and good luck on your test. We'll see you at the next lesson.